is Christianity being politicized and portrayed as an intolerant, repressive, and bigoted view of reality? This week's guest tells us it's all for the sake of an agenda that is reshaping the face of America. Here to talk with us about the agenda, its games, and its tactics is Beverly Eakman, an expert on professional agitation techniques and perception management. A former government speechwriter, she was the first to expose federal and state complicity in what is now known as data mining, and has lectured on the use of predictive psychology in our schools, public institutions, and corporate America. Let's welcome Beverly Eakman. Beverly, welcome to Women of Grace.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, I'm so delighted you're here, and it's been a long time. We have had you on in the past to talk about some of these issues. And of course, what we see happening now is just the extension, and if you will, maybe the codification of what we were talking about at that period of time. It's amazing to me, this continuum that we have been on here in the United States and where we find ourselves. You know, some of the language that I used in the open, I took directly from your book and from your notes. And you tell us that Christianity has been politicized, and it's really being used as a pawn in our country today. Share with us a little bit about how we see this happening.
Well, it is being used as a weapon against people, and all of the norms that we have accepted over the years, if you look at it from a 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s baseline, now we're supposed to see the same norms in terms of bigoted views, intolerance, rigidity, especially rigidity, mental rigidity, and those are psychological terms that carry negative consequences and negative connotations in the public mind already. So they're a little ahead of the game. In other words, this game has morphed.
Yeah, this game has morphed and the stakes have ratcheted up. And when we use the terminology, you know, the reshaping of the face of America, that almost sounds like hyperbole, like we're really exaggerating what's going on. We're not exaggerating it. I think the fact of the matter is the American population, and I've got to say, you know, all of North America really has been in a cauldron, and the heat's been, you know, turned up. We just haven't noticed the rise of the heat. We're like that frog in the proverbial,
right,
you know, kettle. The reality is that we can no longer consider ourselves to be a Christian nation, even though the foundational principles of the country are Christian in their genesis and in the way in which they intended for this country to be shaped.
Yeah, the founders had a specific way that they constructed the Constitution and so forth to reflect Christian nation, to reflect Christian norms and values, but those are being turned upside down now, and that is the whole point of the exercise. They want people to believe this establishment clause type thing, which is that, oh, it's not a Christian nation, we're not supposed to be favoring one religion over the other, but that is not what's going on. We're supposed to be favoring no religion. We're supposed to be favoring atheism, basically, or psychology. Psychology is replacing religion as the religion. Yes. So we can see it in the children already, the hookup culture. Acceptance of that. The music is not music. It's not calming. It's not soothing. It's, you know, not romantic. It's nothing like that. It's to keep you on the edge of your seat. It's panic-inducing, and every film you see is panic-inducing. You almost can't turn on the TV without either put-downs or something of that nature that would not have been tolerated by our grandparents. So we're talking about in a 20-year period. These things don't happen in 20 years without a lot of help.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you have a quote in your book, Agenda Games, and I want to read it because I think it's very important for us to understand, friends. We can't figure out how it is that we've gotten to this point and how it is that we're going to move forward in a positive direction to get out of the point that we've managed to get ourselves into unless we have an understanding of what the backstory is. And one of the pieces of the backstory is this changing of the perception of what American history was really all about. It's a revisionist history. Right. But I want to be very clear in what our founding fathers said. This is a quote that you have in your book, Agenda Games, How Today's High-Stakes Political Combat Works. And in this quote, you're quoting John Adams, and this is from a letter to the officers of the 1st Brigade of the 3rd Division of the Militia of Massachusetts, 11 October 1798. And he writes this. He says, "Because we have no government armed with power, capable of contending with human passions, unbridled by morality and religion, avarice, ambition, revenge, licentiousness would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net." And then he says, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other kind." Now, when we read those words, we realize that if you really wanted to change America or change its direction, the first place that you have to begin is with morality, because this government only can exist in a moral environment.
That's right, a moral nation, and Patrick Henry said it, Thomas Jefferson said it, you know, they all used a different phraseology. But see, the children do not study the Federalist Papers anymore. And they wrote these things back and forth to each other in letters, and they said them, and they talked about them, and we used to study that. But no, the children don't read that kind of thing anymore, so they don't really realize what our baseline is. Mm-hmm. And so it's easy to get them hooked on some other type of thing, and that's what's going on. They're now hooked on sex, they're hooked on immorality, they're hooked on, like I say, panic-inducing movies and entertainment, if you want to call it that. Video gaming is violent. I mean, none of it is calming. Right. And when you live your life, including your entertainment and your dinner and everything else, in a non-calm sort of way, eventually you are going to fall apart, and the country is going to fall apart. And, you know, we're helping the terrorists in a very unexpected way, and this invites alien religions, alien cultures, to walk right in, sit right down. Not that we have been intolerant to them. We have been the most tolerant nation on earth to newcomers to our shores. We're a nation of immigrants, for heaven's sakes. I mean, most of us were leaving, or our parents or forebears were running from oppressive regimes. Right. So that part is fine. But still, the baseline is Christian.
Yeah. Later on in the week, we're going to talk about the way in which education has been used as a tool to help this mind-changing game go on here, if you will. But, you know, you bring up a word that I want to stop and talk about for just a moment, and it's an important word. And the word that you use there is regime. And you use an adjective before it, and you tell us what kind of regime, English teacher coming out here, and you tell us oppressive regimes. Now, is it too much to say that if there is an effort afoot to collapse the moral structure of a nation, that there is a reason behind it? This just doesn't happen in a vacuum. And when you see all of the you know, captains of industry, and you begin to see legislation and political maneuvering going on to lead in a certain given direction, which is all about the collapse of a moral fiber, ought we to, are we being conspiracy theorists to say, you know, something's going on here, and there's something behind this movement, there's something that's going on here?
I don't think that it's a stretch. Not at this point, not when it happens this quickly, especially. When Stalin came in, and Lenin and so forth, even though they had a totally different background, it was, nevertheless, they did it very quickly, and so did Hitler, relatively quickly. What happens is that if you collapse the moral structure, it makes it easy for someone to come in and restore order. Under the cover of restoring order, which people will welcome at that point, then they can issue a crackdown. And we are just that far away from that sort of thing happening now. We, in the 60s, beginning in the 60s, more in the 70s, we started to let crime, we didn't punish crime the way we did before. We encouraged certain types of moral behavior that lead to crime too, and we don't, this is now morphed into crackdowns. We see it with the Transportation Security Administration. You get more than you bargain for once that starts. Once you go down this road, you don't turn back, not very easily. And later we'll talk about perhaps how we can face this down. But at this point, we have waited awfully long. Well, we allowed the means of media to be taken over, the newspapers, the TV stations, and so forth, mainstream. We didn't do enough soon enough, and now it's very costly, not only in money, in terms of money. I mean, you're talking about a 30-second Super Bowl commercial costing millions and millions of dollars. That was not the kind of thing we had when we had nice little sitcoms going. You didn't have that sort of thing.
When we think about that too, I want to pick up on something that you said when you talk about panic-inducing. Even watching the nightly news today is panic-inducing. You watch it, and there's one of the things that you notice, first of all, is that a complete thought is rarely, if ever, given. We've got a 30-second soundbite. Actually, they're not even 30 seconds anymore. They're 10 to 15 seconds, if even that. It's incredibly difficult to take a complicated, as a matter of fact, it's impossible to take a complicated issue and expound upon it, even given a point of view regarding it, in 10 to 15 seconds. It's not a possibility. And so I think one of the big things that we've seen diminish within the culture of the day is critical thinking skills. We don't have critical thinking skills any longer. We can't follow a thought for very long. We've so excited the passions that the mind, the intellect, is incapable and gets bored trying to follow. It shuts down trying to follow a logical consequence or sequence of ideas.
Well, we noticed that in the campaign. And I would urge all the viewers to go back on the internet and review some of those so-called debates, because nobody finishes his thought. They get sidetracked, and the moderator doesn't keep them on message either. In fact, the moderator gets sidetracked.
Well, the moderator sidetracks them sometimes.
Yeah, deliberately.
Deliberately, and that's
but sometimes not on purpose, too.
Well, sometimes not on purpose, too. So you're absolutely right about that. When we come back, we're going to discuss this more, and we're going to talk about a D word, friends, and this word is called deculturalization. We're going to be right back with our guest today, Beverly Eakman. Stay with us. Welcome back, friends. Our guest this week is Beverly Eakman. She is author of the book Agenda Games, How Today's High-Stakes Political Combat Works. We always like to invite you to get out there to our website, www.womenofgrace.com. And do you know why that is? It's because we have so many wonderful resources available for you there. And I would like to invite you to become a subscriber to WOG Exclusive. If you become a subscriber to WOG Exclusive, you have access to all of the television programs that we have produced, or at least a good many of them at this point, going back 25 years up to the present day. So all of the programs that we produce are available for you there, as well as our radio podcasts. In addition to that, we have audio presentations on a variety of topics. We have excellent guest speakers who you can hear right online there. We have webinars presenting on a variety of topics that are certain to enhance your relationship with God and help you share the good news with others. So let me invite you once again to become a subscriber to WOG Exclusive. Every week we have a patron saint, you know that. And this week's saint is on his way to canonization. He is fabulous. He is really quite remarkable. His story, which reads like a spy novel, is a testimony of resilience and dedication to God in all things, and is just the witness we need for such a time as this. In 1929, the Russian Orthodox Church in the Soviet Union was on the brink of annihilation by the communist regime, and Pope Pius XI called upon the Jesuits to go into that country to save those Christians who were being starved in mind, body, and soul. Father Walter Ciszek, this week's patron saint, was one of the Jesuits who answered the call. Born of Polish-American immigrants in 1904 in Shenandoah, Pennsylvania, he was a tough kid who loved to fist fight and hang out with street gangs. For this reason, no one believed him when he said he wanted to be a priest, but he fooled them all and entered the Polish Minor Seminary. Even there, he remained the tough kid on the block, running 5 miles a day, swimming in a frozen lake, and going without meat for an entire year just to see if I could do it, he said. During his first year of studies, he volunteered to go to Russia, was accepted, and sent to study at the Jesuits' Russian Center in Rome. Because no priest could enter Russia directly after his ordination in 1937, he was sent to Poland and lived there through the occupation of Hitler. Finally, in 1940, his dream to go to Russia was realized. Entering the country incognito and under an assumed name, he became a laborer in a Russian logging camp in the Ural Mountains and worked there until his cover was blown, when secret police found his mass wine during a raid of his barracks. Father Ciszek was arrested and kept in a 900-square-foot cell with 100 other men for 6 months. He was beaten, starved, drugged, and eventually coerced into signing a rigged confession. It was one of the darkest moments of his life, but also the time of a deep inner conversion that enabled him to completely abandon himself to the will of God. He was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor in Siberia, where he worked 12-hour days shoveling coal into freighters. Wearing rags for shoes in the sub-zero temperatures, Father Ciszek said Mass for prisoners with wine made from stolen raisins. He heard confessions regularly and began to praise and thank God for the opportunity to work among this hidden flock. He was not released until 1955, but didn't leave the country until 1963, when the KGB handed him over to the American consulate in exchange for 2 Soviet espionage agents. As the plane flew past the Kremlin, he related, "Slowly, carefully, I made the sign of the cross over the land that I was leaving." He took up residence in Fordham University in New York, where he wrote his monumental books, With God in Russia and He Leadeth Me. When asked how he survived the hardships of those years, he answered simply, "By renouncing, finally and completely, all control of my life and future destiny. I was relieved as a consequence of all responsibility. I was freed thereby from anxiety and worry and every tension, and could float serenely upon the tide of God's sustaining providence in perfect peace of soul." He died on December 8, 1984, and the cause for his beatification was opened immediately. It is currently under investigation by the Vatican. Servant of God, Father Walter Ciszek, pray for us. You know, Beverly, I read this man's, isn't that an incredible biography?
Yeah, that really is. I mean, and it makes me think right now how these old women in babushkas used to pull Bibles from under the bed, or they had it locked in secret compartments, or maybe a brick was, you know, in the way, and they would take them and read them to their children and teach their children right from wrong and Christian standards in that era you're talking about, where the KGB and, of course, Stalin, and you couldn't say Christianity, you couldn't go to church, you couldn't do any of those things, and it was the last thing in the world you could do. But they did that, these old women. And, you know, we are getting to the point in this country where we're having to hide the fact of our Christianity or just the values themselves.
Yes.
I mean, if you still believe in monogamy, people are supposed to look at you a little funny.
Yes.
If you believe, well, you get in more trouble not paying your taxes than you do stealing from your employees.
Right.
It's a gotcha society.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and you know, when you talk about this business of persecution, which is really what you're talking about, I think it's very fair to say that we are experiencing the early stages of persecution for the very reasons that you say. To share what is in your heart and mind, to share your moral value, to stand beside your moral value, to defend it, is considered to be politically incorrect. Not only is it politically incorrect, it is supposedly a mental illness because you're being mentally rigid. You have this rigidity which needs to be expunged from you.
And dogmatism. And
dogmatism. I'm aware of the story that was told to me by a friend who worked in a corporation, and an individual in that corporation, a gentleman, decided that he should be a woman. And so he was going through the process of this happening through hormones, and ultimately would have, you know, the surgery to finalize this effort. Everyone in that corporation had to go through sensitivity training to accept this individual. So this behavior that is really an assault against the dignity of the human person created in the image and likeness of God had not only to be tolerated, but had to be accepted, and had to be accepted through training to accept it. Now, what is that training like? Well, we know it's to change a mindset.
Right.
It's to make you look as if you have the problem,
not them.
Not the individual who's going through the sex change operation.
Right.
And so, you know, here we are, fulfillment of Isaiah. Woe to those who call good evil and evil good, who call darkness light and light darkness, right? So I want to talk with you about the D word that I mentioned prior to going to the break. And that D word is deculturization. Right. If there is an agenda, if there is a desire on the part of a group of individuals to reshape the public consensus and to reshape the face of a nation, the first thing they have to do is get rid of the culture that's already there.
That's right.
And is that what we mean by deculturization?
That's exactly what we mean by deculturization. You have to get rid of the mindset that exists, and you have to shift the loyalties.
Okay.
Now that's real important. If you shift loyalties away from family, friends, church, values, then you can come in and with the vacuum that you've created, you can input new values and new, not ideas, they call it new thinking, as if, hey, you're being progressive, and people think that means progress. So here we're talking about semantic deception. You kind of alluded to that a minute ago. What's right is wrong, what dark is, you know, white is black, black is white, and, you know, the upside. I saw a cartoon one time, and it was a great cartoon. These two guys are walking around with signs, and one is carrying one sign says down is up, and the other one is saying up is down. Yeah. And they're passing each other, and it was great. And that's what's going on right now. And it's really hurting children because they're collecting information about parents, about lifestyle data, and that points to their political leanings and their religious leanings, so they can get it up front and start moving the curriculum, inputting curriculum so that it moves them away from the baseline of the 50s and 60s and way prior to that.
Yeah, and of course we know that has been taking place in education for numbers of years. I bet it probably right after the 60s, I'd say probably right in the 70s, there was this shift from disciplines to affective education.
Right.
And it was all about the emotions, all about the feelings. And this is when this data mining began to take place, which we're going to talk about in a subsequent program. So what I hear you saying is, so if we want to implant new ideas, new ideologies, the first thing that we've got to do is basically dismantle or deculturize the culture from what they consider to be true and good and appropriate.
Well, the middle class, you want to strafe, so to speak, the middle class values. And of course, Stalin was very, very good at this. And he gave the middle class the pejorative bourgeoisie. Right. Well, we're doing the same thing. We're not calling it the same thing. Obviously, that would be, you know, too
revealing.
Too revealing. Yeah, I mean, at least, well, you know, not so revealing now. You're talking about kids that maybe they're 10 years old. They don't know that Stalin called the middle class the bourgeoisie.
Right. Well, there's a lot of kids older than that, like in their 60s, that don't quite know what that means, too. So the fact of the matter is, what you're sharing with us today is that there's a systematic method that exists to begin to change a culture. And when we come back tomorrow, I'd like to get into some of those specific ways in which that takes place. Friends, it's been great being with you today. Beverly Eakman, our fabulous guest with us this week, helping us to have a new eye through which we can look at current events today to see what's really going on. We hope you'll be back with us. I invite you to get out to www.womenofgrace.com and go to Religious Catalog for the resources and the programs. Till we're together again, God bless you. Bye-bye now.